Welcome back. Today we're breaking down a transcript from a commentary video by Nuxanor. It's an intense one.
Very intense. It covers the Epstein files, alleged corruption in the UK Labour Party, Keir Starmer, and just, these massive cultural clashes.
It's incredibly dense. It blends these really serious allegations with, well, a very specific online subculture humor. And that, I think, brings us right to our first point of analysis. To really make these serious allegations stick, we're talking government corruption, human trafficking. The vocabulary, it just has to shift away from internet slang to something much more precise.
Yeah, that was the first thing that jumped out at me. The subject matter is, it's about as dark as it gets, right?
Right.
Child abuse, a compromised prime minister, the potential collapse of a major Western nation.
And yet the language used to describe it is pulled, directly from a gaming lobby.
Exactly. You see terms like cuck, retard, leftoid, woke, cooked.
All over the place. And it creates this massive tonal dissonance.
It really does.
When a prime minister is accused of, say, covering for a pedophile ring, which is a government-toppling accusation, calling him a cock or saying he's getting roasted just shrinks the whole thing down. It turns a constitutional crisis into, petty drama.
It's all about the framing. If your goal is to expose this horrific reality, the language has to carry the weight of that horror.
Yeah.
When an audience hears something like, the retards are tarting even further, they're not really processing the underlying claim.
No.
They just hear an insult. And, they're more likely to tune out.
So the suggestion here is to swap out that repetitive kind of ad hominem slang for language that's more descriptive, more impact-oriented.
Right. Emphasize the moral or political failure, not just the personal mockery. You can still be aggressive.
Of course, but the aggression needs to be precise.
So let's look at a few concrete examples, because the creator obviously wants to keep that high energy.
Okay.
Right now, the text accuses Keir Starmer of selling out his country to the highest bidder because of white guilt.
And that phrasing, it just makes it so easy for someone to dismiss the point as just, an emotional outburst.
So a stronger way to say that, while keeping the core accusation, might be something like,
Starmer appears politically compromised, or subservient to external interests, or even ideologically captured.
Oh, ideologically captured is so much stronger.
Right?
It implies a whole systemic failure, not just one guy's character flaw. It moves the critique from a simple insult to, a diagnosis of a failure in leadership.
Exactly. And, okay, what about the Epstein connection? The text describes these powerful figures as getting cooked or obliterated.
Which, again, sounds like they just lost a video game.
Yeah, instead you could say, these figures are facing irrefutable scrutiny, or suffering a catastrophic loss of public trust. That keeps the energy of the win, the obliteration, but it frames it in a context of actual justice.
It sounds like a legal victory, not just a change on a scoreboard.
And we probably have to address the most jarring one.
The retards are tarting even further line.
Yeah. That one line just actively alienates a huge part of your potential audience who might otherwise agree with the political point you're making.
So instead, you could just say,
the administration is doubling down on failed policy. It conveys the exact same idea, stubborn incompetence, but without the baggage that lets an opponent just dismiss the argument out of hand.
It's really about matching the container to the content. You wouldn't wrap a diamond in a dirty napkin.
Good analogy.
So you shouldn't wrap a serious investigation in gamer speak. But okay, moving beyond just the words, I found the actual flow of the argument really, really hard to follow.
That leads us right into our second point. The piece currently feels like a stream of consciousness reaction to different clips, but it really needs a thematic grouping strategy to build a stronger case for this idea of England's collapse.
Stream of consciousness is a polite way to put it. It felt like I was watching someone just scroll through their social media feed in real time.
Yes.
It jumps from the Epstein files over to Israel and Oud Barak, then snaps back to the UK and Starmer.
And then immediately after that, it's Prince Andrew sweating, then selling the Chagos Islands to China, then a female archbishop.
Then specific migrant crimes, and it ends up with the mayor of New York.
You get whiplash. As a listener, you're trying to build a mental model of the corruption, but the data points are just flying at you randomly.
I couldn't connect the dots. I struggled to link the sale of the Chagos Islands to Peter Mandelson's appointment because the text doesn't build that bridge. It just, poof, teleports you.
And the weakness there is that this scattershot approach just feels like chaos, not a constructed argument, not a legal case.
The listener feels the urgency, sure, but they won't remember the cause and effect.
So the suggestion is to group the content, put it into distinct chapters, or, as you said, pillars of failure.
Yeah.
To create a cumulative effect. Organize it by theme, not just by reacting to clips in whatever order they show up.
So let's walk through what that restructuring could actually look like for this piece.
Okay, you could start with Chapter 1, The Compromised Elite.
Right, and this is where you put all the Epstein-related material. You talk about Prince Andrew, you talk about Mandelson's appointment, Starmer's defense of him.
And the Barak and Netanyahu. You keep it all together.
And by doing that, you establish a clear premise. The leadership class is corrupt and deeply intertwined. You prove the character of the government first before you even get to their actions.
Which is the perfect setup for Chapter 2, the policy failures. Because they are compromised, which you just established in Chapter 1, they make bad decisions.
Exactly. And this is where the selling of the Chagos Islands fits, and the blocking of the Epstein files. The argument transforms from, hey, look at this random bad thing, to,
because these leaders are compromised, they are now stripping national assets to please foreign powers.
wow, yeah, that makes the island sale feel so much more sinister. It's not just a bad deal anymore, it's a symptom of the corruption you already proved.
And then finally, you have Chapter 3, the social consequences.
Okay.
This is where you move the stories about the female archbishop, those specific court cases like the sledgehammer acquittal and the grooming gangs.
I love that progression. The argument becomes, these corrupt policies lead directly to this societal breakdown on the streets.
It turns a list of complaints into an actual narrative arc.
You could even use bridging sentences to really lock it in for the listener.
Yeah, like what?
Something like, we've seen how the leadership is compromised by Epstein. Now let's look at how that corruption is manifesting on the streets of London.
That's so much clearer. It guides the listener through the argument. But even with a perfect structure, I think there's still a pretty big issue with the quality of the evidence being presented.
Which brings us to our third critique. To avoid being dismissed as just, purely conspiratorial, the material has to clearly distinguish between documented evidence and the creator's own interpretive theory.
This is where the transcript risks losing that skeptical listener, person who actually needs to be convinced. It just blends verifiable news like Prince Andrew losing his title or Mandelson's documented ties to Epstein. It blends that with heavy, unverified speculation.
Yeah, like the assertion that Epstein and Huda Barak were planning a great replacement in Israel.
Or that Starmer definitely knew everything about Mandelson, or that policies are specifically anti-God.
And when you present speculation with the same certainty as fact, it just tanks the credibility of the actual scandals.
Totally. If a listener hears Epstein was straight up pushing the Great Replacement conspiracy theory, and that turns out to be a bit of a stretch of some vague conversation, they might just discard the valid, important points about the political appointments. One easily debunked piece of hyperbole can sink the whole ship.
So the suggestion is to use rhetorical framing. Separate what the documents say from what this likely means. It's about steel-manning your factual basis.
Okay, so let's apply this to the Starmer and Mandelson situation. Instead of just asserting Starmer hired Mandelson because he wants to protect pedophile, which is, a claim about Starmer's internal thoughts.
Right, which you can't prove.
You could rephrase it. You could say, the documents confirm Mandelson's close ties to Epstein. Starmer's choice to appoint him, despite this public record, raises a critical question. Is this incompetence, or is he protecting a network?
That is so much harder to attack. You're not stating a motive, you're questioning an action based on the facts. You're inviting the listener to draw the conclusion themselves, which is always more persuasive.
Okay, what about the Israel and Barak claim?
Well, instead of just flatly saying they were planning a replacement, you could try something like, the audio recordings reveal Barak discussing relaxed immigration standards. To many observers, this sounds like a deliberate demographic shift.
You attribute the interpretation. You're not stating it as an objective fact of the universe.
Exactly. And we have to talk about the King Charles portrait. The text claims it mirrors into a demon figure. It presents this as like a literal feature of the painting.
That's a major credibility sinkhole. If you're trying to convince people of real government corruption, and then you pivot to, look at this demon in the paint.
You lose the room instantly.
So frame it clearly as symbolic interpretation, a visual metaphor for the state of the monarchy. Just don't imply there's a literal conspiracy hidden in the brushstrokes.
A concrete example could be saying, the visual distortion in the portrait serves as a perfect metaphor for the monarchy's current reputation, instead of, if you flip it, it's a demon.
One is art criticism, the other sounds like paranoia.
It's all about making sure the theory doesn't contaminate the fact. You want the fact to stand on its own, rock-solid foundation.
Okay, moving to our final point. The critique kind of ends on this loose collection of thoughts about spiritual warfare and a call to subscribe. It lacks a concrete synthesis of the political implications for the viewer.
I noticed that too. This so what factor just gets lost in that spiritual angle at the end. You've got phrases like, we are in a spiritual battle, demon-worshipping pedophiles.
And look, while that definitely appeals to a specific niche, it pivots away from the political critique that was being built up. It leaves that political analysis thread just hanging.
The listener is left angry, for sure, but they don't have a clear understanding of the immediate political ramifications for the UK government, for the US elections that get mentioned.
So the suggestion then is to summarize the political stakes before you move on to that spiritual conclusion. Explain why these revelations about Starmer or the Chagos Islands actually matter for the future of the Western alliance that's mentioned in the text.
A concrete example of this would be to just insert a summary statement right before the final sign-off.
Something like,
if Starmer cannot answer for Mandelson, his government risks losing legitimacy before the next election cycle even begins.
That brings it right back to the real world. And to connect it back to the U.S. audience, since the U.S. election gets a mention, instead of just that comparison to the New York mayor, which felt a little tossed in.
You could say,
the collapse of leadership we see in London is a warning sign for Washington.
Regarding how compromised intelligence agencies can hollow out a democracy.
Yes, that grounds the spiritual battle in political reality. It moves from the world is evil to here is the specific mechanism by which this government is failing.
It gives the listener a takeaway they can actually use in a debate. It arms them with an argument, not just an emotion.
Exactly.
It synthesizes the corruption, the policy failure, and the social collapse into a clear warning.
So, let's just recap the big points of this critique. First, we're looking for tonal maturity, shifting from, say, cuck to compromised, to make sure the gravity of the accusations is actually felt.
Then, we need structural cohesion, grouping the content by themes like elite corruption versus social consequences, so the argument builds instead of just wandering around.
We also need evidentiary precision, separating the documented facts from the creator's interpretive theories, so those facts can shine brighter on their own.
And finally, a stronger synthesis of the political stakes to really drive the point home before signing off.
By refining the vocabulary and really organizing the chaos, the creator can transform what feels like a rant into a devastating indictment of the political class. We'd invite the listener to maybe try restructuring that segment on the sledgehammer case and the migrant crime stats using these lenses, and submit it again.
Yeah, I'd be very interested to see how that turns out.
And that does it for this edition of The Critique. Keep refining your work,